their federal benefits. And this is something I had never heard. I had never been. I thought that's crazy. You can't have over $2,000 of savings. She said no, because they're going to lose any kind of benefits they get. The government sees that they have money to, and so I thought that's crazy.
And they're special needs kids.
Yeah. So I had a great conversation with her, but honestly, when I walked away, I was like, gosh, this is going to be tough. I don't know how I'm going to help this problem. I just felt kind of like, this is a huge problem. I don't know what I'm going to do. It's going to take federal enabling legislation. They're going to have to do something at the federal level before we can do it at the state level. Well, sure enough, I was voted in November, and that, I guess December, they made a change. Mitch McConnell at the federal level was part of it's called the ABLE Act, Achieving Better Life Expectancy, and it basically allows savings. You can have over $2,000 now. You can have $14,000 a year put into an account, and it's just over $100,000, I think, total. And so if you're a parent with special needs, you can start saving, and you can still, of course, do trust and everything else, but this is a way you can start saving and have an account. There was a lady that came and testified, and she had a job, and she wanted to, she had a van, and it had repairs she needed to make, and she wanted to be able to save in anticipation of having to buy a new van. But before the ABLE Act, she couldn't save over $2,000 because she would lose her benefits. So that was really neat, because before I was even elected, I found out about it. My wife mentioned it to me, and I was like, I gotta find this lady. And I didn't remember her name, but I knew where she lived. So I was looking on Google, trying to find it, and then try to look up the PVA, like, who is this lady? And her name's Karen Ardenia, and she reached out to my office and was like, hey, I want to let you know that. And I was like, I saw it. And so we started working, started having that conversation. It didn't happen right away, but in another, we waited a session. Mike Denham, who was in Bracken County, we both represented Bracken County together at the time. So he was a Democrat, I was a Republican. House was controlled by Democrats at the time. And it was great. It was just a great, it's an important bill, but it felt good. It's like how democracy is supposed to work. You have a constituent issue. You make a change that's going to benefit a number of people. You work across party lines to get that done. Mike and I both had the same approach of, I don't care if Mike gets credit for it. I don't care if I get credit for it. We just got to get this done to help people. And at the end of the day, they ended up using the Senate bill version. So my version got passed. And it's been a good, seeing that and talking to families that have benefited from that. It's been really rewarding.
Yeah, and that's one of those, I agree with you, that you hear it and you go, what?
Yeah.
Who in the world would have thought this was?
Yeah, it's one of those things. I'm sure at some time the idea was, it was a good intention idea. We want to make sure people aren't, taking advantage of government benefits and stuff. But I mean, $2,000 in 2018 doesn't get you very far.
No, not. Well, and it's
medical expenses and everything else. So.
And it's similar to the Windfall Act that teachers are complaining about, Kentucky being one of the states. I get Social Security taken out of my check here for the Outlook, but I can't draw upon that money because I have a teacher pension.
Yeah.
I can draw very, very minute amount to what I'm actually paying in, where if I'd never been a teacher, I can't draw from that.
Yeah.
And it's kind of one of those, why? Why did they ever even put that in when they put it in years and years ago? So, and I know at the federal level, there's people trying to change it. So hopefully it will. You mentioned you were involved in heroin, from your prosecutor days, those kind of things. And that was a great segue into my next question. What does the legislature need to do to help support local areas who are battling this drug issue? And it's a statewide, nationwide problem.
Right. So in 2015, we really looked at that. We really dialed in on it. Again, back in 2015, it was the governor's office. Beshear was Democrat. The House was controlled by the Democratic Party. And so I was appointed to a task force. We got in the final days of a session. I was appointed to a bipartisan task force that included the House and the Senate, and coming up with a bill that bill increased trafficking penalties from those traffickers coming in from Ohio, or not just Ohio, out of state traffickers. It increased the penalties, but it also did things like naloxone, Narcan, which you used to have to get a prescription per dose each time. So you'd have to go to a doctor and say, hey, you know, I have a son or I have a daughter that has this addiction. I would like to be prescribed this. And it took that. We worked with the pharmacies to have kind of a blanket authority where you didn't need the prescription. So
that's parents can now get that.
not just parents anymore.
But what I'm saying is somebody, it's not a EMT or ambulance.
Not just them.
I could carry that in my house,
Yeah.
and that legislation allowed that.
Right. And so that saved thousands of lives. I have no doubt about that. Now, is there more we could do as far as getting those people, not just reviving them, but you got to get them set up on recovery, and that's a part that we still need to work on. But that bill in 2015 was a landmark bill. Other states have looked at that bill. There's some money provided for neonatal abstinence syndrome, where the babies are being born addicted to heroin, and how do you get them off that? And then since then, we've also looked at, we've been kind of reactive. How are we gonna be proactive and just prevent this from happening in the first place? And what we know is about 85% of heroin users start out with legitimate prescription pills, taking those, and then develop opioid addiction. So how are we going to stop that? So we worked, in these past sessions, talking to the physicians, and when you hurt your back and you go in and you get 30 days of, oxycodone or some kind of narcotic, well, do you really need 30 days? And so talking to physicians about, okay, can we do 5 days? And obviously you have all your exceptions, cancer, chronic pain, but if it's just something like a back injury, do you need a whole month's supply? And then that starts involving the insurance companies too. Okay, how are you going to bill for? Typically, you just bill for 30 pills, and now you want to.
There's a little gnat flying around. I'm not seeing things.
Trying to punch me or something.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah.
Trying to not even have someone ever develop that addiction in the first place, mm-hmm. And just getting that information out there too. So many high school athletes. If you read the book Dreamland, which is all about the opioid epidemic, there's a big focus on, you'd have soccer players or football players in high school get an injury and not know, they'd have no idea that they were prone to this addiction, but they start using narcotics and they're just hooked. And so really start asking the questions as parents and asking the questions just as individuals, like, do I have to, my back hurts right now, but can I take 2 Advil, or do I have to go to the doctor and get, a narcotic? Yeah. And asking those kind of questions.
Okay. All right. One of the other issues, I was at a fiscal court meeting a couple weeks back, and they were talking about the passage where it used to be 50-50 split on the audits, that state would pay 50 and the local would pay 50. I've been to many board meetings that they've talked about unfunded mandates coming down. A lot of the local governments are getting the opinion that costs are being shifted from the state level to them, and that's a trend that is putting more and more burden on the local. What's kind of the thought process or status, or how do you feel on that philosophy of those kind of things occurring?
Right. So I think that's something we always have to be cognizant of. And for instance, the governor, one thing the governor has been really big on is talking about criminal justice reform. And so we're starting to have those conversations of, should something that's a felony today that was, enacted in 1970, should we start looking at, should it be a misdemeanor instead of a felony? And those, what I tell people, I'm open to having those conversations. I think we should have some of those conversations. I think they're long overdue. I don't think we should, negate, still sometimes criminal actions are criminal actions. But we've learned so much too. And we also, going back to addiction, we've learned about addiction and how, that's different than just someone breaking into a store because they just want money. When you have an addiction and you have heroin or something like that, that's different when you have that addiction. So looking at it from a different mindset. So as this relates to your question, the idea that, okay, let's just make something that's a felony a misdemeanor. Well, what that does is when it's a felony, the state is the one paying the jail time. The state's the one, the Campbell County Detention Center, where, people are put in the Campbell County Detention Center, or Pendleton County has a contract with one of the other counties.
It's actually Campbell County.
Yeah, I thought it was Campbell County. So you put people in the detention center, and then they are reimbursed through the state when it's a felony. But if it's a misdemeanor, that doesn't happen. So, for instance, if we reduce something from a felony to a misdemeanor, and Pendleton County arrests someone for that misdemeanor, sends them and is paying them, paying Campbell County to hold that person, well, they're now not getting reimbursed. And so that's going to be a huge cut to the county governments. And I think so what I always try to remind people is, hey, it's not just about like, should this crime be a felony or should this crime be a misdemeanor? It's also, once we decide, yeah, maybe this crime should be a misdemeanor, the second part of that question is, okay, now how do we help the county government,
Gotcha.
take this, to bear this cost? Because if you just overnight, use the possession of a controlled substance, for instance, overnight, if you make possession of a controlled substance, the ones that are felonies, misdemeanors, the cost burden on the counties would just be astronomical. So that's...
And made to the point that they quit, I don't want to say quit arresting those people, but...
It's just gotten hard, yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm always, especially when it comes to school districts, trying to look out for, unfunded mandates. And in school districts especially, it's easy because people come up with a lot of good ideas, right? We need CPR training. We need some kind of other educational training that is not being provided, or maybe it's optional and people want to make it mandatory. And what I'm always reaching out to our superintendents about is like, how do you guys feel about this? Because it's an unfunded mandate. We're not sending more money along with you to do it. We're not telling the teachers, hey, you have an extra day to teach us. We're just saying, now you got to fit this one more thing into your curriculum. You guys figure it out. So that's one thing I've always really tried to be cognizant of.
Yeah, that one more thing, my goodness.
Yeah.
I mean, as retired athletic director, it got to the point that I had a part-time coach that I was paying $800 to be an assistant coach, and was giving them 14 to 20 hours of required training that they had to do before they could coach, so that they could get $800.
Wow.
But those were state and local requirements of employment, and so they had to watch these videos online and everything, so they get that big whopping $800. And it would just make my brain want to explode.
Right.
About,
Right.
you're just back to your example of creating business laws that would prevent people from companies wanting to come to Kentucky. We were creating a system that I had people that didn't want to coach because I can't afford it. I work 40, 50 hours a week. I can't sit down in front of a computer to do this.
Yeah.
Going on, we had mentioned January 2019, 30-day session. It's hard to get a lot of things done and those kind of things. You kind of touched upon this earlier, but I wanted to circle back to it again. What changes or tweaks? You got the one bill that I had sent out to the four of you all about raising the $31,000 to $41,000 for pension income. That's been filed. But what are some other things that you see we have to address this 30 days?
Right, great question. So one of the things that happened when we did tax reform, around that same time that we were doing tax reform, the Kentucky Supreme Court had a ruling, and their ruling impacted nonprofit taxes. So in the past, in the Commonwealth of Kentucky, under the Constitution, it had always been considered that nonprofits were exempt from taxation. Well, just this past, I guess we were still in session, I want to say late March, they came out with a ruling and said, our interpretation of the Kentucky Constitution is for property, that's for land, the land taxes that you pay. But the other taxes aren't exempt. So that really changed the way things were looked at, and the Department of Revenue started taxing other things associated with the nonprofits. I was at an event, a charity event last night that my wife is part of a group. They were doing a silent auction, and they were doing, collecting, and you have to, they basically right now nonprofits are either eating the 6% sales tax or they're passing it on, and that was never the intent, and it wasn't. People think that was part of our bill, and it wasn't. But what it was a different interpretation and a ruling from the Kentucky Supreme Court that changed the way that's done. So our president in the Senate, President Stivers, and the Speaker of the House, Speaker Hoover, have already said, look, that has to be something we address right away, and I agree, because nonprofits, they're trying to make it. They're you'll have the Special Olympics or any good, really good cause, and then you're telling them, okay, for your admission to your dinner, you need to charge 6% sales tax, and that was that wasn't us again, but it's coming back on us because people know we had other tax changes and they think that's something we did. So it's in reaction to a court ruling, but it's something we need to address.
Can that be retroactive, or is it just going forward? And you have to eat the 1 year.
I don't know. It might be able to be retroactive. I'm not positive about that. That's I'm sure that conversation is going to come up. So I think part of it is just the administration of dealing with, a nonprofit like last night, for instance. You just have my wife and her friends are volunteering, taking turns, taking the helping with the auction stuff. So just the administration of, okay, how do I do the 6%? Who do we send it to? The Department of Revenue, and how's all that work? That's a problem in itself. But I think that question will come up.
Well, we wondered yesterday, as we discussed it, how is it affecting the Wolf Fest?
Yeah.
That's 6% on all the tickets they sold, and $3, and all of that kind of stuff. Now the businesses inside, they're used to dealing with sales tax when you buy a wall hanging or something like that. So that's
right.
But that, I'm assuming, is something new for the admission.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, any other things? Any other ones that you just say, knowing going in, we've got to address this?
Well, I think if it depends on the Kentucky Supreme Court's ruling, I think that could take up the whole session. That might be the conversation going forward, is that bill, are we going to pension reform again, We're going to have to deal with it again.
That's true, very true. You mentioned something earlier that I wanted to loop back to. You had mentioned in 2015 the heroin bill with Governor Beshear. It had Democrat and Republican support. You made the phrase that it was passed in the last days of the session.
Yes.
Was it passed in the same process
It was.
that the pension bill was faced?
Correct. So my concern with the Attorney General's lawsuit, because again, as I said, I think the process could have been better. I think we need to have people have plenty of time to review everything. Same thing. So you had a little behind the scene. I'll get in inside baseball politics with you, and I hope your viewers appreciate it. But Senator Chris McDaniel, a colleague of mine, he represents the Kenton County, part of Kenton County, and he was you may recall, he was running with Jamie Comer. He was the lieutenant governor candidate on a race. And Jack Conway, was the attorney general, who was also a candidate.
Yes.
So Chris McDaniel had the heroin bill come out of the Senate. And my predecessor, Katie Stein, had worked on this heroin bill for years. So Chris had this heroin bill. Well, the House, which was controlled by Democrats at the time, didn't want Chris to have that victory, which, again, when you're in that Frankfurt bubble, those things seem important. You had no idea who was the sponsor of the heroin. No one knows. The general public doesn't know. They don't care.
Yeah.
But there was this idea that they didn't want Chris to have that victory. So what they did was they took Paul Hornback, who had some kind of bill related to prison and prison care, and it already passed through the Senate chambers, and it had 3.
And he's a Democrat, Paul Hornback?
Paul was a Republican in the Senate, and he had 3. His bill had 3 readings in the House. And so they did a committee substitute process where they took out all that prison language. They substituted in the heroin bill that we had been working on. They vote to amend the title, and then they send it back to us. And so the bill that we ultimately voted on, I think it was 191, was Paul Hornback's bill. He was the lead sponsor, even though he ultimately didn't even vote for the bill, because they changed it completely, and he was against some of the things that the heroin bill did. So
So he didn't have to give his approval for his bill to be changed?
No.
And so they changed it without his approval, and he voted against
He voted
the bill
against
he
it.
was named
So,
as the
right,
lead sponsor on.
right.
Ha!
So
That's
yeah.
just
It's just, and again, it's one of those things that, I mean, it's silly because the Commonwealth of Kentucky, the population, you know, the people, the constituents, they don't care whose names, and that's what was great when I worked with Mike Denham on the ABLE Act. We were both like, let's just get this done, you know, and it's been good, and a lot of times it is like that.
Yeah.
But sometimes, I guess in that case, you had two lieutenant governor candidate, and you had a governor candidate, so.
Gotcha.
There's just those kind of
But
concerns.
the point there is, and back to the potential historical nature of this court,
Right.
if they rule that process unconstitutional, then the process of that heroin bill in 2015 that had bipartisan support when it went
Right.
through, that process is unconstitutional.
It is.
And the chances of somebody sitting in jail underneath penalties
Exactly.
suing that they should get out because that bill was unconstitutional, probably
Exactly.
pretty high.
And that's the point I've made, and people will say, well, no one's going to challenge the heroin bill. That's a great bill. Like, it did so much good stuff. And I said, if you're a defense attorney and you have a client sitting in jail under the new provisions from that bill where they have a tougher penalty because they came in maybe from Cincinnati to traffic in Newport, you have to check. Like, you have to do it. Because depending on how this case goes, and there's precedent for, you know, the 3 readings rule, then yeah, if you have a client, it'd be malpractice not to challenge it. So I think everything's a really fair game that was passed with the committee substitute process.
I've heard that one of the options that the Supreme Court has that they may take an out on is to rule that the process was possibly unconstitutional, but they have no authority to change it because of the separation of powers. That the judicial cannot weigh in on what the legislature sets the rules on how they're going to run, and the judicial has no power in there. I think that's the argument Bevan's lawyers made.
So I've heard, yeah, a little bit. I think it's kind of goes to the procedural, and you know, we follow Mason's manual. It's, you know, you hear of like Robert's rules. Well, the General Assembly follows Mason's manual. It's a common one used by the different state legislatures, and that's, I guess, you know, a valid process for doing it that way. So there is, in the past, the court has said, you know, when it comes to their Senate rules or the House rules, that's for them to decide. We're not gonna, it's a separation of powers. We're not gonna get involved in that. But if it's actually a point where it's, you know, I think the question now is it unconstitutional because of this? Then I think that it's kind of changes it, you know. I think so. I expect a ruling. I mean, I don't think they're going to necessarily pass the buck. I think they'll come out with a decision. But again, my bigger question is the part 2 of that. If it's appropriations or a revenue bill, because that's just giving whatever governor we have in office a lot more authority than he currently has, or she currently has.
Yeah, and yeah, I won't sidetrack on there. All right, last couple questions I have for you. Just the one question. As voters are considering and they're getting ready to pull that lever on November 6th, or if they're absentee voting and they're getting ready to do it today, what do you want them to be thinking of the difference between voting for you and voting for your opponent?
Yeah, great question. So 4 years ago when I ran for the seat, I asked the voters of Campbell, Pendleton, and Bracken County for an opportunity to represent them in the state Senate, and I made 3 promises. I said that no one was going to outwork me for the citizens of this district. I said that I would treat, regardless of the population, I'm going to treat each county fairly and represent them fairly. And, you know, I think I've done a good job of attending all the events and being present in every county and available. And then thirdly, I made the commitment and promise that I'm going to make decisions not what's best for me politically or just my future, but what's best for the citizens of Campbell, Pendleton, and Bracken. And I think I've done, when you go through each of those promises, I've lived up to those promises. I mean, you talk to my colleagues in Frankfurt, no one's working harder. I'm responding to constituents, I'm reading everything, I'm staying there late. I've great relationships with all 3 judge executives, fiscal court members. I'm always talking to them about the counties and the county's needs. And then I made tough decisions. You alluded to earlier, it's not once you get elected, it's time to start voting. It's time to start acting. And, I made decisions what I thought was best for the Commonwealth of Kentucky, not just what would be easy. I mean, there's people, trust me, down there in Frankfurt that anything that's even remotely controversial, they're just going to take a pass on. I haven't done that because I got elected to address problems. That's my philosophy. So, where my opponent and I are different on a number of issues, I'm a pro-life candidate. I was endorsed by the Kentucky Right to Life. She was endorsed by Planned Parenthood. I got an A NRA rating and got the endorsement from the NRA, and she received an F from the NRA. But then when it comes to other policies, again, goes back to how are we going to continue to attract businesses? And I think we have a proven track record of doing that. Her philosophy, I think, is very dangerous and will lead us to a path where companies are leaving, and the idea that we're going to tax out-of-state corporations at a higher rate. I think would be a very bad decision for the Commonwealth of Kentucky. So, what I'm doing, and when I'm running, I'm going to continue to work to make Kentucky a better place to live, work, and raise a family. And that's my philosophy. When I see a bill, how is this going to help Kentucky be a better place to live, work, or raise a family? What does it do to accomplish that? And that's what I asked the voters on November 6th, to give me an opportunity to work together so we can continue down that path.
As I mentioned, you were down here for a coffee with the candidates this
Yep.
morning. What other upcoming events, if you have somebody who wants to come out, meet with you, talk to you about issues, maybe show up and support,
Yeah.
whatever, what other events do you have coming up?
Well, you're putting me on the spot a little bit. You might know the date. We have a Farm Bureau at the high school here.
Thursday, October 18th,
So-
meet greet from 6 to 6:30.
Yep.
I know this not because of a great memory, which I don't have. I literally just put that on the happenings page
Well, good.
10 minutes before this interview
Oh,
started.
okay.
So
Yeah.
I'll be honest on that. But that's Thursday, October 18th
Yep.
at Pendleton County High School Auditorium.
Yeah.
But anything else?
And then, we're here frequently just at random events. I know the Southern Elementary is going to have this fall festival coming up, so I try to attend, all the different those events. And then, as soon as we're done here, I'm going to change my shoes and start knocking on doors. So that's another way constituents can talk to me personally. I really enjoy that because sometimes, again, take social media out of it. Let's just talk. Let's just have a conversation at your doorstep, or shoot me an email, and I'd be happy to give me a call. I'd be happy to get back to you.
I had a first-time candidate for a local race, and one of the things, when he started going out and talking, he said, one of the things I didn't plan on is I would tell my wife, I'm going to go out and I'm going to cover this many homes. And he'd get to the 5th home, and that guy wanted to talk for 45 minutes.
Right.
And you can't leave,
No.
but you don't get the homes covered either that you had hoped to cover that night. So
That happens often. But it's good. It's great to see people engaged. And it's better than the alternative where no one cares or just doesn't, or is upset because you're knocking on their door. Because I've had both. I've had people annoyed that I'm there, and I've had people appreciative that I'm there. And it's always great to have people appreciative.
Well, if you stop by my house today, jump on the lawnmower and get the backyard done for me. No, I'm just kidding. So, like always, we appreciate you coming down, talking to us, and spending time with us so that we know that we're representative in Frankfurt as you've done, and that if you're reelected, what you'll do in the future. Continue, hopefully, to watch our candidates talk, our conversations with Keith and all these candidates. As I mentioned on other videos, lining up county attorney, magistrates, and city councilmen for interviews, and we'll continue to post those, hopefully continue to provide information to you. We'll also have kind of a summary story to go along with that. Talking an hour and 30 minutes, I can't include anything. So make sure in all the other ones you read the summary, but you also check the video to see the complete answers by the candidates. So thank you all again for coming. Thank you all for listening, and we'll see you later.